Hey Sue, how's it going?
Great. How about you?
Very well, thanks.
So, we want to welcome everybody to the Weight Mastery Program. I'm not sure what episode this is, but they'll fill in the blank. And what we want to talk about today is the transformational impact that this program's had on people that we've had through the program. You know, I think, hearing about somebody and their path would really resonate with some people because I don't think we're that different. I really don't think they're that different. And so why don't you start, Kevin, with how the Weight Mastery Program has impacted you, and specifically the first part of it, the plan, which is the way of changing your habits, getting in touch with your hunger, keeping track of your eating, those kinds of things which obviously end up in weight loss.
So for me, I've always found that it's not that complicated to lose weight. I've managed to lose lots and lots and lots of weight. The problem for me has been sustainability always, because when I was doing those diets, regardless what the diets were, whether it was keto or Bernstein or the South Beach diet or low carbs and high protein, whatever it was, they all work. Right? All of those diets work. You can do Bernstein, take vitamin B shots in the belly a couple of times a week, and eat 800 calories, and you're going to lose weight. The secret isn't the shots in the belly; it's the thermodynamic piece of it, where if you just consume fewer calories than you burn, you're going to lose weight. But the problem becomes, how do you sustain that? How does that become a lifestyle? And
not deprivation,
not deprivation,
or pure willpower, or doing without, or starvation.
Yeah, listen, we can all do that, right? I've got to lose 10 pounds for this wedding because I've got to fit into a suit. Most people can do that. But then what happens after they lose the 10 pounds is, the 10 pounds comes back and they bring friends. And so now, you're plus 15 from where you were not so long ago. And then it gets pretty depressing. It gets pretty, it's a cycle that sort of happens over and over again that really is difficult and devastating. And so when I was introduced to the plan after our April lunch, almost a year ago now today, when you showed me that yellow folder with the plan in it, what really resonated with me for when I took a look at it was the fact that it was based on something that wasn't deprivation. It wasn't based on something that was white knuckling it, but it was based on some pretty sound ideas and pretty simple ideas to follow. Most diets are simple. Eat less calories than you burn. That seems pretty simple, but it's not easy. Right? There was nothing easy about it, but it was simple. There was brilliance in the simplicity of it, and it resonated with me because I don't want anything that's complicated. I don't want to have to, pick my finger 3 times a day to see what my macros are and have it be analyzed. This has to fit into your life. It has to fit into your day-to-day operations, the way that you go about your life, because this has to be something that I can't think about anymore, because I've been thinking about it my entire life. Right?
It's been heavy, doesn't it?
It gets really heavy. It's a lot of stuff that you end up packing on in addition to everything else that you carry on a day-to-day basis, and it causes stress, like a lot of stress. And when we're under stress, it's not a great situation. We don't perform optimally in any way, shape, or form. So for me, the fact that it was simple was really, really important. And
How did you feel about yourself at that time, just prior to embracing a different way?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I can go back to that time, and I had just started to lose a little bit of weight. I had started to change some things about what I was doing, but I really sort of plateaued a bit when we met at that lunch. I was feeling okay about the direction I was headed in, but I was starting to question, how is this going to be different this time? And, magically, then we had this lunch, and you presented me with this thing, and I was like, oh, this is really something that I could follow because of its simplicity. And so that was the first thing that really struck me is that there's only 4 steps, right? It's all fairly straightforward, and they're logical steps. There's things about what we talked about and what the plan is, at least the first part of what the plan is, that really kind of made sense to me, right? It was like, okay, so I drink lots of water, I track my food, I figure out why I'm eating, and then, the one thing that I was never introduced before was the idea that you finish eating when you're satisfied, not when you're full, right? So all of those things were kind of, there's things that I knew, but it's like everything else. It's not necessarily just because you know it, you don't implement it in your life. But once I started to implement that, then the weight kind of started to fall off. And the more I focused on the habits and the reasons why I was doing it, it wasn't necessarily the how, right? It was the how sort of took care of itself, which is sort of neat for me because like that's how I believe life works for me anyway. Is my responsibility is who am I being and how am I showing up as a person, but how am I showing up, not how am I getting the results. And so by showing up as that person and by working on the habits to become that person, then the rest of it seemed fairly simple for me. And it became something that I could implement into my life in a much more natural way where it didn't feel like I was dieting.
Right.
And it didn't feel like I was struggling with this. This felt like it was like this kind of a good vibration feel.
So, Kevin, let me ask you, how heavy were you at your heaviest? What was
Yeah.
your top line?
Yeah, so my top line was 345 pounds.
So just pause.
Yeah.
How tall are you?
I'm 5'6".
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you feel?
Yeah, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about how I felt.
Well, how did you show up? Like how?
Well, and that's why I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about how I felt, because I was showing up as a part of a person, like a big part of a person, but just part of a person. So my life really in those days was wrapped up in staying busy, so I didn't have to think of any of those things. Like I didn't even realize back in those days that I was as overweight as I was. And how I found out that I was as overweight as I was I had just bought a new house. And so the mortgage agent that I was dealing with recommended that I get life insurance on the mortgage. So I filled out a life insurance application, and that went to the bank, and they came back to me and said I didn't qualify for life insurance. And I was thinking, well, why don't I qualify for life insurance? That's really sort of strange. And then they said I should contact my doctor. And so I arranged a call with my doctor, who I'd known most of my life. My mother grew up working for him, in fact. And so he had a very forthright and candid discussion with me. And so what he told me was that I was diabetic, which I didn't know. He told me that my triglycerides were 10 or 15 times normal. He told me that I was hypertensive, so I had high blood pressure. And that was the reason why.
Did he use the O word?
We had, that was the thing. From the time that I was young, again, my mother worked for the doctor, so I used to go into his office and I'd have these regular checkups or appointments, and I wasn't really sure what it was for. And so one day I was in there and my file was in on his desk. And so I walked over to the file, and I can remember being 11 or 12 years old because I was always very curious. And I opened the file, and really it was hard to make out his writing, but the word that sort of recurred time and time again was obesity. And I'm like, well, what the hell is obesity? I didn't know, as an 11-year-old growing up in Northern Ontario, I had no idea what obesity was. And so then, back before the internet and stuff, I went and I found a dictionary at school and I looked up obesity and I thought, wow, that wasn't really a good thing to be described as. And so that sort of became a descriptor
And
for
so
me.
at that moment, as an 11-year-old, learning for the first time that you were obese, looking the word up, how did that make you feel? Like, were you proud? Were you ashamed?
Oh,
Did you
shame, the shame.
Did you want to hide or?
Yeah, it was, it's just tons of shame, right? Like just because it labeled me as different, as other. Right? And I could already see that I was other because, my friends didn't have weight problems like I did. Like it didn't seem like anybody had a weight problem like I did, right? Like nobody else was 240 pounds in 7th or 8th grade, right? So I already saw that I was different. But then this obesity and then what the dictionary definition of obesity was it was kind of devastating. It was just, yeah, I can remember, trying to make jokes about it with myself, just to try to make myself feel better. But the more I became the brunt of the joke, the worse it sort of became, right? And then, I wasn't born to sophisticated parents in any stretch, and I'm sure that they did the best that they could, but I can remember my father referring to me as the fat little bastard who wouldn't amount to anything, which was something that he said over and over again. It wasn't just once or twice. And I'm, even I look back to this day, I'm not entirely sure why somebody would, I wouldn't say that about my children, not to them, not under my breath, not to anybody.
Well,
But
it's probably meant as a joke, but it's one of those jokes that aren't the least bit funny.
it really wasn't, very funny at all. If we're being completely honest, it was one more of those things. And for me, I guess I decided back then, I'll show you, I will amount to something. But I never really got past that fat little bastard piece for a long time, like for just into the last year and a half or 2 years, that when I really sort of started to look back at that, and I had some memories come up in a coaching session one day, and I kind of understood exactly what that meant and how that felt.
And how that you manifested or it showed up time and time again throughout your life.
It suddenly made sense why I could lose weight, but then I would put weight back on. It wasn't that I couldn't lose the weight. It was I couldn't escape the person that I had been labeled as, obese and fat little bastard. And then, I remember when I played football in high school, my football coach, his name was John Thrasher. I'll remember his name forever. And he was a thrasher, all right. But he was good to me, sort of, right? And he called me the short little fat guy, because that was his sort of
Term of endearment.
Term of endearment. And so on the one hand, my my relationship that I have with my parents was a little bit strained because of what they considered, like the fat little bastard thing. But then the short little fat guy was like, I got good attention from that, right? I got to start playing offense and defense. I got to, I got to do some things, and he let me out of some drills because, well, I was carrying a lot of extra weight, right? So, so it was a sort of a dichotomy, really, of how I felt about that. So on the one hand, I didn't feel really good, but on the other hand, it got me good attention. And so, I never really dealt with that issue until much later in life.
And I guess at the end of the day, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I'm going to have the name, I'm going to play the game.
Absolutely.
So, it becomes part of our image.
Yeah, not only that. I mean, it was a part of me that I had convinced myself it was the reason that I had success. It was the reason, that was my edge.
That's your positive outcome.
My positive outcome, my edge, if you will, that thing that made me different and separate was the fact that I was overweight. Yet I still achieved these successes, right? And so I was like, yeah, I did this and I did this, and I was fat, right? Okay, so you try that being fat, and so that was sort of my attitude about it, which is you know, as I look back, it was kind of crazy, right? But just how it became everything that there was about me, at least in my way of thinking, like even listen, when I was single and I was you know, would go on you know, dating sites and stuff. I would go on dating sites and not put up a photo of myself because I never wanted to.
Or a caricature.
Or a caricature. Yeah, absolutely. Like I never wanted to present myself as who I was. I always wanted to be somebody different. And then, you know, I would go through these spells where I would lose weight and I would get a photo taken. I'd be like, oh, I'm going to use that picture from now on. But then that's not authentically who I was as a
Right.
person, right? I had evolved from being that person, and that didn't represent who I was anymore. But I still wasn't comfortable with, you know, standing in front of a camera taking a photo of myself, right? Just because.
And what
it
was under that uncomfortable?
Yeah, well, it was shame. There's no other way to describe it other than I had a real hard time showing up as the person that I was, right? Because I had this mentality, this caricature, really.